Hello. Today on the show, I'm in conversation with Alisa Bell from California, United States. She studied electrical engineering in Stanford University. She loves to travel, backpacking, and was fond of cycling right from her childhood. Her long distance bike touring journey began in 2018. Since then, she has traveled through multiple countries and covered more than 16,000 kilometers on her bike. So, up next, she talks about her bicycle touring journey and all of the experiences associated with that. Hi, Eliza. Welcome to Road
Hi.
Vendors. Thank you so much for joining us and taking out the time to have this chat with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, you've been a cycle tourist and you've cycled around a number of countries, covered more than 10,000 kilometers on your bike. So, I wanted to ask you, when did this cycling journey begin for you and what was the motivation behind it?
So, as a kid, I learned to ride a bike like a lot of kids do, and took short rides for fun. And then in my 20s, every now and then I would commute by bike when I had a job that was close enough to home. But I never cycled overnight until maybe my late 20s when I was getting into backpacking, actually, so hiking with a backpack. And at some point, it just kind of seemed like the next logical thing. I didn't even really know much about bicycle touring, but my husband and I would just put some camping gear in a backpack and ride to a campsite and then come back, and we thought we were pretty creative at the time. And then over the next few years, I think I started to become aware that people were doing this over long distances, like across entire countries, and that there was gear for it specifically, and that whole world existed. And somewhere in, I guess it was late 2018, I was looking for a break in my career anyway, and wanted to take a longer trip, and decided to just jump in and try this bicycle travel thing. So I got a touring bike and went to Southeast Asia for 2.5 months, and that was my first real tour.
Wow. So, which all countries did you happen to travel through in Southeast Asia?
I started in northern Vietnam, which was beautiful, but kind of a silly place to start because it's really mountainous. It's a lot of steep hills, so that was kind of tough. Things got easier when I crossed into Laos and cycled down the entire length of Laos along the Mekong River, and then into Cambodia, which was also very interesting. The roads were not quite so nice there sometimes with all the traffic, but crisscrossed Cambodia and then finished in Thailand, in Bangkok, just a little bit of Thailand.
Right. So, which all other long trips have you done?
So that was the first, and then after that, I did a trip in Patagonia, like southern Chile and Argentina, which was gorgeous. And then after that, it's a little different. I did a race across the U.S. actually, so my home country. I kind of wanted to combine this idea of bicycle travel with endurance sports and just do a long ride at a faster pace. So that was quite interesting and very difficult. And then most recently, actually just earlier this year, I was in Egypt and Sudan for about a month and ended up having to come home early in March. So those are the big ones. And then I've done some smaller ones closer to home too.
Right, nice. So, after cycling so many kilometers, what do you think, So, how has cycling changed the way you look at life?
I think cycling and travel sort of together, and the way that you travel when you travel on a bicycle, right, which is kind of this very specific type of slow and very interactive, immersive travel. From that, I think I've gained a lot of perspective on the idea of culture and what it means to grow up in a specific culture, and how different cultures can be, and how there's no one right way to be a person, or to be a society. And so as an American who grew up in America and hadn't left the country until I was in college, I think it's been really valuable just to learn how many different ways there are of doing things in the world. And also, just personally, I've gained a lot of confidence going and doing these rides alone when a lot of people say it's not safe or you can't do it. I've just learned that things have a way of working out, and that I can deal with situations that get a little difficult or a little weird. And I think that carries over into lots of other areas of life.
So, how do you choose the next destination? What is the, reason why you choose to cycle through a particular country or a destination?
That's a good question. I usually wait until I finish one before choosing the next, because what I'm looking for always seems to change. I think the first one, Southeast Asia, I chose because it was kind of this, or it seemed like, and I think it was, this sort of mix of, it was like an intermediate level tour, if that makes sense. There's a lot of infrastructure, there is some tourism, it's a pretty cheap place to travel. You can stay in guest houses for just a few dollars a night if you don't want to camp. It's not too remote. Many of the roads are good. So I felt like for my first tour I wouldn't be completely overwhelmed, but at the same time it was culturally different for me, and I felt that it would still feel like a good adventure. And then, after that, I think because it was not as wild and remote, I was looking for something that was, and so Patagonia came along, which is just beautiful, and there's a bit more open space there. And my own country, that was sort of just a coincidence with the race that I happened to discover, and thinking that it would at that point be interesting to be a traveler in my own country. And then Egypt and Sudan, just something different culturally, a part of the world that I'd never been to before, and a culture that I'd never experienced up close.
Right. So is India on your list?
I would love to someday. I've actually never been to any part of India, and I've heard really good things. I'm also kind of intimidated, just it's so big and I wouldn't know which parts to choose. I don't know. Do you have a recommendation for a great place to cycle in India?
Yeah, India is, very different geographically, and it'll be definitely a treat to cycle through south and north and east and west, which has all different sorts of, terrain to offer. So I'm sure, if you and whenever you plan to come to India, it's going to be beautiful. It'll be a memorable journey for sure.
Yeah, I hope I can go someday.
So, can you tell me about the high points of your cycling journey?
Yeah, I think it goes back to just what made each trip really unique. Like the first one in Southeast Asia, there's kind of just nothing like those first few days when you go somewhere by yourself with all your stuff and realize that you can actually travel from town to town, and that slowly you're making your way across a country. For me, that was so exciting because after all the dreaming and the preparing, it was finally happening. I think Patagonia was a high point just for the scenery. I mean, I love to do backpacking and spend time in the wilderness, and so to be on gravel roads in these places with lots of open space was it just made me feel really happy. I was really, really happy in Patagonia most of the time. It's a fairly relaxing place to ride. And then Egypt and Sudan, the culture there is just so welcoming to travelers, which is it's something we love to talk about. I don't think it's like our right as travelers to be welcomed everywhere. But when it happens, it sure does feel nice, and I really appreciated all the people who I met there who were so nice.
Nice. So what, according to you, is the key to cycling long distance?
I think, well, if the issue is that long distance is intimidating, I actually feel kind of inspired by long distances, so it's not always a problem, but if I am feeling like it's just too far maybe and I need a little help, then the key for me is just to not think about the final distance and just take it one day at a time, because the days have a way of adding up, and then before you know it, you've gone a long distance, but it wasn't really necessary to think about it that way to begin with. So just day by day, even hour by hour maybe, or just get to the next town. I think also feeling like it's not about having to get somewhere, but it's more about what happens along the way is really helpful. I noticed that in the beginning of long tours, often I rush for no good reason. Like I don't stop for food enough, and I just rush through the day like I'm supposed to be finishing with this early, and it doesn't make any sense because it's all I'm going to be doing for the next however many weeks or months is pedaling my bike. So once I kind of make that transition into feeling like it's like I am right where I'm supposed to be all the time on my bike, and I don't have anywhere I have to get to, then the miles just kind of float by, and before you know it, you're at the end.
Right. So can you share any one memorable incident from your cycling journeys?
Yeah, so this is hard to choose because there have been so many, and most of them have to do with the people that I meet along the way and the interactions I have. But one that I would choose from a ride that I haven't talked as much about yet is my race across the U.S. I actually had some really incredible interactions with people in my own country who live in places so different from where I do, who I never would have met otherwise. So I was... my pedal broke. I rode like 20 miles on with one pedal, mostly downhill, but not all the way, into this tiny town in the Midwest with no bike shop. I mean, not much there. And it was at night, but I had intended to keep riding because it was a race, and I didn't want to get stuck in this town. So I was super hungry. I didn't know what to do. So the first thing I did was go to a McDonald's because it's America. Of course, there's a McDonald's there. So I'm sitting in McDonald's, and this couple ask me where I'm going because they see that I'm in bike gear and they see my bike. And I was sort of frustrated, and I said, well, I'm not going anywhere until I figure out how to fix my pedal because it's broken. And I look to the side, and there's a McDonald's employee standing there in his uniform, kind of watching the conversation, and he says, bike pedal? You need a bike pedal? my brother has bike pedals, and it turns out that his brother, even though there's no bike shop in town, his brother like fixes up bikes for the local kids and stuff. And so he calls his brother, and the brother comes over with a whole box of bike pedals, and they go out and they find one that fits my bike, and they put it on, and then just to be sure, he actually rides with me to the home of this guy in town who used to race bikes competitively to see if he had a better pedal, which of course didn't work because he had like actual good racing clipless pedals and I was riding flat, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. So, but he was super nice and we talked for a long time. And it's just that feeling after being alone on the road for days to finally feel like you have a little community instantly in this place you've never been before, was really special. So, and then I had a working pedal, and that was enough to get me a few days down the road to the next town with a bike shop.
Nice. So, which cycle do you use and which do you recommend to beginners?
I use a Surly long haul trucker, which is kind of the classic road, pavement or gravel, long distance touring bike. So it's steel, it's heavy, simple parts. It's designed to be like repairable as many places in the world as possible. It has been, tied to the roof of buses and dumped in wooden boats. It's been shipped on airplanes and boxes. I've crashed it. It's actually been fantastic. Very few issues, and everything that has come up, I've been able to fix. So I do recommend it. It's not a cheap bike. It's kind of like a mid-range touring bike. When I bought it for my Southeast Asia tour, I was kind of scandalized actually by how much I spent on it. I think it's like $1,000 or $1,200 or something, which was by far more than I ever expected to spend on a bike. But it's possible to spend quite a bit more if you go looking. So I think it's a decent bike for beginners if you're a committed beginner and you have the money and you're looking for something that's gonna help you have a smooth journey, that you won't be stopping to fix things all the time or replace parts. But it is definitely not necessary. And in my early days, before I knew what I was doing, when I was taking short trips, it was just on like beat up old bikes that I had sitting, or my husband and I each had an old bike sitting around, and we took those, and they worked just fine. So I always recommend for beginners, just use any bike you can get, and then take it from there. Decide if you want to change later.
So when you're on your long journeys, is there any specific diet plan that you follow, any specific exercise regimen?
Yeah, it's interesting because when the trips are long enough, then these daily habits actually start to add up, right? So at home, I try to eat fairly healthy. I eat a lot of vegetables and, try to watch the sugar and the carbs and stuff just because that's what makes me feel best. But on the road, you don't always have that option. So it depends a lot on the country that I'm in. But usually I find it's easiest to find things like very high carbohydrate foods like rice and bread. Like in Sudan, there was bread everywhere. And in Southeast Asia, it was all rice all the time. And these staple foods, they're cheap and easy to find, but they don't always provide like that really dense nutritional content that you want as a cyclist. So I tend to look for protein and fat whenever I can find them. And most countries have some version of this, like peanuts or pasteurized milk or those little cheese wheels, Laughing Cow cheese. Every country seems to have a version of that. In Vietnam, I found moon cakes, for example, were really great because they had all these dense nuts. And so I just look for the fat and the protein as much as possible and then fill in with whatever else I can find. For exercise, yeah, so I started, like the very first active thing I ever did was getting into running and trail running. So I still try to do a lot of that when I get home. I find that it uses very different muscles from cycling, and so the challenge for me is how to stay balanced. And so when I'm home, I do a lot of strength work, weightlifting and resistance bands and exercises for my core and my glutes and hamstrings, because otherwise my quads, the muscles on the front of my legs, just get way too strong and everything gets weak. So sometimes I even do this on tour if it's long enough. I'll bring a little, like a stretchy resistance band and do some exercises on tour to try to stay balanced. But it's always a losing battle because I'm usually too tired to really do much. So I focus on that when I get home. And then the more I bike and the more I run, I find the more I need to stretch. So I do a lot of stretching and yoga.
So with that, we're at my last question, which is if you can say a few words for your fellow cyclists.
So I guess it depends on where you are in your cycling journey. I think for anyone who is thinking about a longer trip but maybe is intimidated by the idea, I would say when you get a chance, certainly just go for it if you can, if you're able to make the space in daily life. A long trip isn't really that much more complicated than a short trip. It's just the same thing. You just get to see more places. So definitely go for it. If you're already doing long trips, so it's kind of a hard time right now with the pandemic, right? When I left Sudan, there were a lot of cyclists who had planned to cycle from Cairo to Cape Town in Africa, and they were canceling these trips that they'd planned for years and had only just started. And so I think it's a challenging time for everyone for a lot of reasons. And the small side effect is that those of us who like to travel are limited right now. So I've just been trying to find ways to look for what I enjoy about bike touring, like the spontaneity and the connection and the creativity and the curiosity, to try to find some of those things closer to home. And I wish the same for everyone. We'll all get through it and get back on the road.
Right. So thank you so much, Alisa. Those was really wonderful words. It was absolutely fascinating talking to you. And I hope that you think of India and you make a trip to India really soon and I get to meet you as well. So
thank you. I hope I'm able to.
So thanks.